Welcome to CNC Tips and Techniques. I'm Randy Johnson, and in this session we're going to be following up with the Christmas ornaments, and in this one we'll be looking at the tool pathing as well as how to take the single-sided designs and turn them into two-sided projects. But before we get into that, I just want to let you know that coming up in the next couple episodes we're going to be doing some 3D work. First, I'll be doing a session on how to work with 3D models within VCarve. VCarve is actually quite powerful in managing 3D models. And then on session number 9, episode 9, we're actually going to create a 3D model dish and add some 3D shapes to it to do the carving for a candy dish. So if you want to register for the live webinars for those sessions, you could do that with the link shown on your screen, and also the links will be in the description below this video. So with that, let's hop over to VCarve and pick up where we left off last time. Now, I did a little bit of cleanup in this file from what we had last time, and I'm going to review a couple of things. But first off, we designed these three Christmas ornaments from last time. And then I also have set up a couple of sheets, one for acrylic and one for wood, and we're going to do 3 on each one of these, and we're going to treat each of those a little differently because of the material type difference as well as the thickness type, so it'll require a little different, some different toolpath setup. But first what we need to do is go ahead and lay and move these projects, designs over to these. So let's start out with this one right here, and I'm just going to copy that, right click, and do copy to sheet, and the sheet I want to move it to is to the wood sheet. So I'll click like that, and there you can see it showed up right over here. Now I'm going to take and move this one to the top of the design area. So I'm going to grab it, and then over here in the move tool section, I'm going to use the absolute setting, the center of it, and move it up to a positive 4 inches in the Y direction, which will put it right there at the top and position it nicely. I'll go to the round and basically do the same thing. Select it, right click, copy that to sheet wood, double click on the wood sheet to activate it, select that one, and let's move that up right to the middle. 0, 0 on that, and then the final one is the snowflake. We can again select it, copy to sheet wood, and now when we look here, we have all 3 of the ornaments lined up nicely on that new piece of material. Close out of that. We're not going to need these 3 sheets anymore, these 3 designs. So I'm going to go to the sheet setup here, and let's activate the wood one by double clicking on it. That makes that active, and then we'll deselect and hide those 3. Now the next thing, we're going to take and select those 3 ornaments, right click, copy those to sheet acrylic, and so we very quickly now have our design set up on our 2 sheets of material. So the first thing we're going to do is set up on the V-carving, and then we've got to do a cutout as well as drill or route out a little hole here at the top. So for that, I'm going to do a little bit of grouping first. I'm going to select the outsides like that, hit group, and then I'm going to select the little holes in the top for the hooks and group those as well. Then I could select everything and then just simply deselect those 2 groups, leaving me just with the VCarve designs that are left. And then I can group those as well. The grouping just makes it easy when I start setting up my toolpaths. If I click on any part of the design, then everything is selected, and that way I don't leave anything behind. So next up, we could go over to our toolpaths, and the first one we're going to set up, of course, will be the VCarve. So I'll go into VCarve, and go into my toolpath, get the bit that I want. The bit that I'm going to use for this is going to be a 60-degree, but I'm cutting hardwood, so let's do this hardwood setup. And so that's my hardwood settings, which comes out to around 100 inches a minute on this, and 20,000, giving me a chip load of 0.005. It works out pretty well. So that one I found works well. If you have different settings that you prefer, feel free to go with those. This is somewhat conservative. You could probably be more aggressive on the feed rate and maybe even a path depth, but I'm just setting these up kind of a moderate setting right now. So I'll select those. Now we see our V-bit listed there. Also, we're going to put a flat depth, and for the wood ornaments, we're going to go 1/10 of an inch deep, and we do not need a clearance bit on that. And we'll go down through the bottom here. All the other settings are grayed out, so we won't use those. And let's just we'll set that up as a V-carve and click calculate. Zoom in on that, and you can see it. Let's preview. And there's the design setup right there. Okay, so let's go back to the 2D view now. And let's set up on the cutout. We'll do the hook hole next. So let's do the drilling toolpath on that. You could also route that hole out. That's another way that I do some of these, but the drilling toolpath works as well. Either one works. Cut this just a little below through the material. See, we're going to 1/4 inch, so let's go 0.26. And then let's look here what I've got set up for 1/8 inch bits. Let's go scroll up here. Okay, so okay. So let's go ahead and set this one up, copy this over. And I call this an end mill 1/8 inch slow, and that's because I'm using a slow feed to go down when I'm doing the drilling. And the router speed looks fine. Pass depth looks fine as well. So I'm going to apply that, select, and just check these other settings. We're going to retract above, use PEC drilling, and we're going to come 1/10 of an inch above the material to get the chips out. Everything else looks fine here. So let's select our set of holes, hit calculate, and let's just preview that. So that looks good. Next up, we'll take our profile toolpath. Pretty straightforward. We'll select the outlines for all three of them. Now we're going to switch out, and let's go to our hardwood, and we want 1/8 inch fast. So let's set this one up for hardwood. Let's copy this over and see how these settings look. Okay, so let's actually take the medium. Let's see okay, there we go. 100 inches a minute, 22,000. That looks good. Could probably slow this down to about 20,000 actually. Let's go with that. You can apply and select. Now, ranges in here on the spindle speed, you'll find that if you have the 2-horse spindle or even the 3-horse, using an 1/8 inch bit, cutting 0.05 deep, somewhere between 18 to 22,000 produces good results. And the feed rate, again, you could go anywhere from 80 to 180 inches a minute or even faster. On these small designs like this that are so tight on these corners and turns, especially the snowflake where it goes in and out, it's unlikely that the router or the feed of the router will come up to the full feed speed anyway, because it has to slow down as it goes around those turns. So that's why I usually set it up somewhere kind of in the middle for a medium speed. Put that just a little faster, apply, and select. Again, you might find you may be able to be a little more aggressive with your tool depending on your particular router bit and how you have your machine set up. But what I've shown there should get you going pretty well. Now let's see the cut depth of this. We're going to go to 0.26 in the wood. Go to the outside. And let's add some tabs. Let's make this tab small, 1/4 of an inch. And 1/10 of an inch tall, 3D. That looks good. Let's edit the tabs. And we've got 4 tabs popping up. It kind of remembered from the last time I set it up. So that's convenient. I'll just stick with those 4 tabs on each of them. Close out of that. Let's add a little bit of ramp, smooth ramp. That looks good. Just double check all these settings. And let's call this cutout. Calculate that. It's okay. Preview that. And that does it for the wood ones. Now let's take and group these. Actually, let me undo that a second. Let me delete that and show you a trick. Delete that. If I select all those, right click, group visible, it will do it automatically. Puts them all under a group. And then here I'm going to just rename that wood ornaments, like that. And so we have our toolpaths all set up for the wood ornaments. Now let's go back to the 2D view a second. And while we're in doing all these toolpaths, let's do the acrylic ones next. Now if I double click on this, it'll open it up. It's empty, but let's go back to the wood one. We spent some time setting all these up. So let's just go ahead and right click and let's copy those to the acrylic setup. Now we'll go into this one over here. And we can see everything about it's identical. So we're going to rename this acrylic ornaments. And then the V carving, it's red. All these are red because they're not associated with anything. But since we duplicated everything over, we should be able to do a quick association. Now I'm going to do the association first, just like, I guess these aren't grouped. So let's go ahead and group those. Calculate. Drill. Hit the G key to group those. Calculate. And then the cutout, same thing. Now we're getting some warning messages, but I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so now our acrylic though is only an 1/8 of an inch thick, and of course all these tool paths were set up for the wood, which is thicker. So I just want to get everything associated, then I'll go back in, double click on the name here, and I'm going to change the flat depth here to 0.03. All we need to do is engrave fairly, actually let's make that 0.5, that'll work out just a little bit deeper. And also I'm going to go back in here, and the speeds that I'd set up, you see it's under hardwood, and we can see the speed and the feed and all that down here on the settings. I'm going to change this out for acrylic. It'll still be the same bit, but you'll notice how I've slowed down my RPMs down a little bit. And that's going to give a better chip load. It'll keep the router bit a little cooler. It'll give a little better chip load in the plastic cutting. So let's apply that and select. Everything else looks good. Calculate that out. And then we're going to do it back to the drill. And here again, we need to make that drill a little shallower. So let's put that to 0.126. And then if we look in here, that's the hardwood settings. But actually, if we go to acrylic, it's really the same settings. So either setup would work. Calculate that out. Say OK. And then on the cutout, we're going to do the same thing we've done. I'm going to go back in. Let's get the cutout. We're going to use medium speed. Let's just see if we got some settings here for acrylic. Again, they're fairly close to the same. Let me just see how different they are. Okay, so this is 20,000 RPMs that I use with the wood. And with acrylic, I'm slowing it down a little bit further to 18,000 for a little better chip load. Again, keep the bit a little bit cool. Let's select that and then go back up underneath the cutting depth, and we're going to type in 0.126. Tabs, let's make the thickness of this tab a 1/16 of an inch thick. Well, let's round that up to 7. That'll be fine. And then edit the tabs. Again, we have the 4 tabs. That looks good. And the ramping, same ramping, a 1/2 inch for that cutout, and calculate. So there, we have toolpaths now set up for each of those. So that goes pretty fast, setting those up. Next, we have to set up our table and some registration pins to register these pieces. We're only doing one-sided on these, but I like to use pins. You could just clamp or glue or however you hold your material down to your table. You can see how the data position is set up for the middle. You could just zero your bits out over that middle and cut the parts. But because I'm doing multiples of these, I want to have the table set up so I can just swap one piece out, doing several of them during one day's worth of work on these. So let's go back and open up a sheet here, and we're going to take a look at the setup single-sided. Now the way this is working is I'm going to be adding some dowels along the sides to align my material up. And we're going to talk about these measurements here in a minute, but let me show you some other additional pictures here. So that's the holes being drilled out there. That's the basic setup for the material. So you can see here that I've drilled 4 alignment holes for these alignment pins to register the material, and then of course set it up against it. I'm using hot melt glue to hold the material down. It works quite well, quite strong. I just use a utility knife along the edge to cut it, and then or a chisel to pry it off the table. This pin right here isn't required for the setup for the long board, but if you're doing single ornaments, then you could use that as a lineup for a 4x4 inch piece of material. So that's included just with the setup in case you need it. But if all you're doing is 3 up like I have here, that one particular registration pin actually isn't needed. Now, to position these registration pins on the table so that the center of our datum, or XY 0 point on our material ends up right there in the middle, there's a couple things to consider. You could pick a spot on the table and just run the pin toolpath after we set that up and put everything there. Or if you want to be a little bit more exact about it, this is what I recommend people consider. This dark gray outline around the outside here represents the table on a HD 500 machine. So it's about 12 inches wide by 24 inches deep. Your machine may vary depending which model or which machine you have. But what I'm doing is I'm homing the machine down to the lower left. And after homing it, I'm then moving it over 5 inches in the X and back 8 inches in the Y, so the router bit and the router are centered over this area. And then I'm re-zeroing the XY, so this becomes my datum or XY0 for my project. And having set that up, that's where I'm then taking and bringing my material onto the table. I bring my router bit over that, or rather I bring my router bit this area, slide the material up there, and it all lines up based on where those holes are. But the initial setup, as I was mentioning, is you're going to bring it over 5, back 8, which will put it right over here, zero it out, and then you'll run the pinhole tool paths, like you see right here, put the pins in, and having done that, then the center of your material automatically lines up to that datum location. So let's take a look a bit at setting up these pins. So you can see how I've got measurements located. So let's go back to the wood design over here, activate that, and the pins are 3/8 of an inch diameter. So I'm just going to place a pin here, 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 and one over there. And then I'll use the alignment tools to get everything set up. So the first thing, I'm going to select all of them, center them left and right horizontally like that, so they're aligned in that direction. Then I'm going to go in and move the left or the right edge rather, which I want to align with my material, and that would be a -2 inches, just like this. Hit apply, and that moves them right along the material. And then this lower one would be a -6 inches in the Y, like that. Actually, let's do the top edge of it. -6. There, we can see how that is. Next, I'm going to use these measurements I've laid out over here. So this one is the center of it is 1.5 inches off of the center of the project material. So that would be 1.5. That moves that into position. And then here, these measurements are coming down from the data point. So this one right here would be 3 inches down. So let's go at -3. And then this one is an additional 2, so that would actually be -5. And that positions it. Again, it's not critical, the vertical positioning of these, but it is critical they be aligned right along the edge of the material. But if this is up or down a little bit, if this lower one is left or right, that'll still work out. But let's go and take that one and move that. That's 4 inches up, so that's a 4-inch positive direction in the Y. And we now have our 4 pins lined up. Now I'm going to take, again, just group these for convenience. And let's group them like that. Now, if I go back over and activate this setup, this sheet here, I already have some registration holes that I've set up. And I could use those, or I could do the same. Since they're in a group like this, I could select the top and I could copy those to the wood sheet. And then we could go back over to this one. And again, they're disassociated with any circles, but that is easy enough to do. So again, let's open this one up first. Now for this, I'm using a 1/4-inch end mill. I call it slow because if we look at the settings, I'm going at 30 inches on the plunge rate and the feed rate and a fairly slow spindle speed on this. Because I'm slowing it down because it just reduces the chances of burning on that little hole, as well as if you go with a really fast feed rate and plunge rate, it tends to act too much like a sewing machine or a fast drill press, and we don't doesn't do as nice a job when it drills that way or cuts. So slowing it down helps. Say okay on that. And let's select our holes here. Let's go just a little over 1/2 inch deep on these. We're going to go on the inside. Rest of these we don't need. I'm not going to do a ramp. I'm going into MDF. And so this will cut. It's warning me that I'm going to go deep because my material is only 1/4 inch thick, but that's okay because I'll actually be cutting the spoil board. So that's set up like that. Now, here's one of the interesting things. If I quickly grab this one and open this up, notice how these vectors are already selected. So if I like my settings up here, which I do, I'm just going to hit calculate, say OK, and click down this list. Automatic selects those vectors that were used before and go on down. So now, using the same router bit for all of these, all the same settings, but you can see the diameter is different. But I'm using the same vector. All these vectors are 3/8 of an inch diameter. But I made adjustments, little adjustments in these tool paths, and I'll show you those in just a minute. But first, notice how this cuts right out to the vector line, right out to the vector. This one cuts a little bit bigger, a little bigger, a little bigger, a little bigger. Now, I've mentioned this in some of the other videos I've done, but when I'm working with a fresh setup, maybe a different router bit or a different machine, I like to set up a range of holes and find the one that fits the best with my pin. Once you're set up with a pin material, whether it's plastic or wood or aluminum or whatever you're using, and a router bit on your machine, you'll probably figure out that one of these is the right size, and then you can just use that all the time. But I switch between machines. I try out different bits and straight bits, spiral bits, different kinds of cutting configurations. And sometimes there's a slight difference. I've worked on some machines and router bits and different materials cut a little differently also. And sometimes the 375 works out, and sometimes I have to go all the way up to the 395 to get my pin to fit in the hole. So I just like to create all of these in one setup, and then I cut the smallest one first, try the pin, and I have all these available at my machine, so I don't have to go back to VCarve and try it again. Now, to achieve this, let's go to this one right here. I added a negative allowance. Since I'm cutting on the inside, a negative allowance pushes the router cutting to the outside of the line. And this looks like a very small amount. It is. It's about half the thickness of a piece of paper. But remember, that's both on right side and the left side. So together, that's adding 0.005. Thus, if you look at the bottom here, 0.005 plus 0.375, we come up with the 0.38. So that increases the overall diameter by about the thickness of a piece of paper. And that works out fine. And then so each one of these, then I incrementally increase that by about, each time I went up about the half the thickness of 0.0025, I added to that each time. And then that ended up increasing it incrementally like that, giving me that range. Okay, so we've got that set up. Now let's bring up our acrylic. Let's see our acrylic. Let's turn off this setup here. So we got these two settings now. Now we really only need to run these registration holes once. So let's just take a look at those one more time. So there again, you're gonna cut those in the table. You're gonna insert your pins. Again, for this setup, these are this is what's called 1/4 inch PEX plumbing pipe. It's a supply line for sinks and toilets and things like that. It's very consistent in diameter. It has a 1/4 inch inside dimension and a 3/8 of an inch outside dimension. Of course, being plastic, it's easy to cut, easy to work with, inexpensive, and if your router bit hits it, it's not a problem. So that's what I'm using. But if you have wood dowels or other types of setup, you can modify the diameter of your holes accordingly. Okay, so now let's go back and turn that off for a minute. Okay, we're now ready to save these toolpaths to our USB drive or to the computer or wherever you save your tap files. So I'm going to select the registration holes first and then click Save. And I'm going to use this third option here, which is all visible toolpaths to multiple files. And I don't want to group these because I want to be able to cut these all individually. And I can leave that unchecked as well. Click Save. And then I'm going to change the default name to CO for Christmas ornaments, and then type in RG holes for registration holes. Click Save on that. And let's just go take a look at it again. Hit Save again. And there you can see the 5 toolpaths that were just saved. So it's the registration holes, and they're in the order that we want to cut them in from smallest to largest. Cancel out of that for now. And then we could go down to ornaments. In this case, these last two ones, because the drill and the cutout use the same router bit, we could go ahead and group where possible. So in this case, I will group those. Click Save. And then let's hit, again, just type in CO for Christmas ornaments. Save it. Let's go back and take a look at that. And there you can see we have the V-carve set aside by itself, and then those at the bottom. Now it says drill because it picks up the name of the first of the two, but we could go back in if you wanted to say drill. We could actually rename that drill and cut out like that. And let's cancel out of that. And if you want to take a peek to see if it actually worked, you can see there that it did actually save that name. Now we want to make sure and cancel because we don't want to save over that. Let's cancel out of that. So those are set up, and now we can do the same thing with the acrylic. Highlight the acrylic. And in this case, again, I'm going to select all of these, use the same settings I had up here above. Let's click Save. Let's simply type in CO for the prefix on that and hit Save on that. Take a look at it again. And there we are. We've got our 2 acrylic ones and our 2 wood ornament ones, and then our registration holes. So with that thumb drive, you could go to your machine and do all the cutting, all the setup you need with that group of toolpaths. Okay, with that done, let's go ahead and take a look at what it's going to take to do these as 2-sided setups. So for that, I've already prepped up a sheet here. Let's take and look at 2-sided setup right here. And let's temporarily turn off the acrylic because we're not going to do sided cutting with the acrylic. We'll just be doing 2-sided cutting with the wood. So we'll activate that and hide the acrylic. We could actually do something a little different. Let's take this wood and let's duplicate this. And on this one, let's rename it. Let's take and put that one one-sided. And then this one, let's rename it and call it 2-sided. And let's turn off the 1-sided setup. And now the 2-sided setup, we're going to be using a different arrangement of pegs or registration pins. So these we won't need, so let's delete those. And also the peg setup is going to be done on the back. But let's do a couple things before we go to the back side. I want to carve that design and that design to the back side. So let's copy those to the other side. This ornament, I'm going to do something different at the back side, but let's take a look at the back side next. And you can see how we can see through from the other side right there. I'm going to add a little text to the back of this. Let's just go Merry Christmas. And let's move that text down here. And let's get a type for that. There we go. Let's use that. Let's make it bold. And let's increase that a little bit. And then let's just center that like that. So we're going to carve that to the back of this particular ornament. The others, we're just going to duplicate the other side. So with that done, let's look at the tool paths a bit also. Let's go back to the first side. We'll look at these tool paths. Now, those registration holes, we'll make use of those in a little bit. But let's take a look at the V-carving. Since we're cutting from both sides, let's reduce the depth of cut on this to 0.05. Make it a little shallower on both sides. And hit calculate on, I'm going to select our vectors like that. Calculate. And then the drill, that still works, as does the cutout, so there's nothing we have to change. But let's just preview those, see how those look. And those look fine. Now the V-carving one, we want to copy that to the back side, so we'll take copy to other side. And let's flip it over. And again, let's associate it with, let's just select all of those. Hit the G to group those, open this up, select them, and calculate. Preview those out, and there you can see what it's looking like now on the back side. Now we can see that we've got the front side and we've got the back side, or the bottom side. Now the doweling or the registration holes that we want to set up, which I have specified over here, and we'll look at that in a minute. I'm going to do everything from the bottom side. It's going to save me a tool bit change, and it just makes it a little bit more efficient on the setup. So I'm going to highlight this. Let's get this one open. Here we go. So we got some photos to look at here. So first off, I have registration pin holes that are going to go in the spoil board, and I have registration pin holes that are going to go in the bottom side of the project board. And those are a mirror image of each other. And here you can see down here, those are the ones going in the spoil board. And then we're going to put our, just like we did before, we did the same offset of 5 inches and 8 inches to find our datum point. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my bit over to that location and zero out the bit to my datum point, which I would have done that before I cut those holes. But then I'm going to bring my bit back to the middle, slide my board under there, and that gives me a relative location for where my board is going to go. Again, because I've got waste material around here, it doesn't have to be super precise. If I'm off by a 1/16th of an inch, it'll still work. But also, these are my old holes from my other pegs. I'm actually using those to actually kind of line up the side. But if you do the router bit just like you see here, and if you measure from the side of your spoil board over the necessary amount just to get that parallel, it'll work out. Because once the dowel holes are drilled, the alignment of this piece, as long as it's close, the alignment is dependent on the dowel holes, not the perfectly centered project board. And in this case, then I drill the holes in the deck first in the spoil board. Then I'm going to center my board. I'm going to mount the board, again with hot melt glue in this case. And then I'm drilling dowel holes or registration holes in the bottom side. Now notice that this is the top right and bottom left, where in the spoil board, it's bottom right and top left, which lines up with what we see here. So these orange ones are going in the project board, the blue ones are going in the spoil board. And again, the reason I do it this way is I put a 1/4 inch bit in, I find my datum location, I cut these holes first, I put my project board on, glue it down, route those holes since my 1/4 inch bit is in the material, and then I go back and run the tool paths for the bottom side of my design. So there you can see here, I just put the year on the back of it for this one, and I engraved the top and the bottom ones. And again, they're engraved a little shallower than I did for one-sided design. Then I pull that off the board and I put the pins in the table, the 2 holes that we cut at the very beginning. And notice how this top one, which is top right, is going to flip over on top of that one. instead of having mounted that board with the pins and glued it back down, I can then do the machining on the front side. And those pin alignments guarantee that at the flip is a true mirror image. So we'll look at how we lay that out to do that. It's a pretty straightforward process. If you've not done this before, this is a pretty good project to practice on. And if you have done it, of course, you're aware that it's surprisingly precise if you get those dowels set up correctly in your VCarve file, the vectors. So let's go back up to the top up here, and using these dimensions, we're going to lay out the pins over on this side over here. So again, it's 3/8 or 0.375 diameter holes. So I've got it set up at 3/8 of an inch already, so I'm just going to go over to my design over here for now and just snap a couple of locations. You can see how it's lighting up around my objects over there. Having done that, I can then go in and use my alignment tools to align those like that. Just try to get these aligned in the Y direction and then line those up in the X direction. And then I can take these as pairs. And you see it's 1.25 inches off from the datum. So let's open up our move. We want that to be a negative 0.125 off from the datum from the middle there. So we can apply like that. Select those two. That's a positive 125. And then these top ones are 5.25 up. So I'll select those as a pair and change that to 2.5, and that'll move those up so that those are 5.25 above the datum line right there. And then these bottoms, as you can see here, are 2 inches below the datum line. So this should be a -2, like that. So now they are mirrored left and right, which is the most important thing, and they are mirrored off of the center line. And then horizontally, they're also mirrored, or not so much mirrored, but equally measured off of the datum in the Y direction. So we've got our 4 holes set up. So we got those matching over there. So next, let's go back to the front side. And we have our registration holes already set up here. So let's take and move those to the other side because we don't need those on the front side of the project for this setup. We only need those V-carving tool paths. Now let's flip back over, and now we can associate these. So I'm going to select, and then I'm also going to duplicate these like this. And these I'm going to rename table. Okay, so just to keep things straight, we're going to do the holes in the table, the holes in the spoilbird first. So these would be these two. So let's select those and then group those. Open this one up. It's active. Now in this case, we do want to go that deep since we're going into the spoil board. So hit calculate, say OK, and we'll just keep doing that for all of these. Again, as I mentioned earlier, once you find the size that works well for your particular bit and your particular material and your machine, then you could probably focus in on selecting which of these is the one you need so you don't actually have to save all of them. Okay, with that done, then let's select the other two, which are going at our bottom board. So let's group those as well. And let's open that one up. Now in this case, we want to change that depth just the thickness of the material plus a little, so we'll go 0.26. Calculate. Open this one up. Again, it's going to be those two that we're going to be cutting. Change that to 0.26. And we'll just do that for all of these. Goes pretty quick because those holes are all pre-selected. Okay, let's go back to 2D view a minute. So we have those set up. We've got our V-carve set up. Now our V-carve, let's shrink these up here. Our V-carve is going to be cut after we cut the holes. So let's just move that down the list right there. And let's just double check our V-carve. We're doing a fairly shallow flat depth on that. Okay, that looks good. Let's go back over to the top a minute. Let's double check our V-carve on this one. Again, 0.05 on the depth on that. And the drilling, again, we can also look here. You can see it goes 0.26 on the maximum depth. And the cutout is 0.26 on the maximum depth as well. So that looks good. So now we've got those files all saved or created. So now we can go to save them. Now again, you're going to cut the bottom side first because that way we're actually not cutting the project out yet. It'll leave the most material there for the cutout on the other side. Now we can start saving the files. We're going to save them starting at the bottom here first because we want to cut our holes, our registration holes first. So I'm going to highlight that group of toolpaths and then click Save. And I'm going to use that option again, multiple files, but I don't want to group them. And I'm not going to add a side name at this point. I'm just going to leave both those unchecked. I'm going to click Save. And in this case, I'm simply going to go CO again for the project. And I'm going to go holes in spoil board. That'll just differentiate that from the other ones. Click Save. And then I'm going to go down to this group and do the same thing. And I use a similar name, but I'm going to go CO holes in bottom, like that. And then this final one, the V-carving one right here, I can click on Save, and I'm going to go, let's call this CO bottom, and let's delete that part of it. And let's take a look at how those saved. So there we have the V-carving toolpath for the bottom two-sided. So the two-sided, that name is referring to the wood two-sided is referring to the sheet name right there. So that's why it's a little longer than before. So it's Christmas ornaments, bottom side, sheet name is wood two-sided. It's the first one we're going to cut in the V-carving setup. And then we also have our ones that we're going to cut in the bottom of the project and the ones we're going to cut in the spoil board. Next up, let's go ahead and flip back over to the top side. And here we could select it like that. We're going to save all those. And we could group where possible. So it'll group those latter two. And we got the V-carve. Now notice we still have the V-carve bit in the tool when we flip it over. So that actually saves us a tool change. Plus we already have the holes drilled in the top. So we've saved a bit change on this. So let's save this out. And then let's call this CO And let's just put the name of the sign right away, right there. Top. And let's take a look at that again. So there, now we've got our top side, and then all the other ones are working on are on the bottom side. Spoil board for those, and then the bottom parts for those. So that's all the tool paths then that you can take over and cut all the parts. So let's just go back and look at the photos here a second here. Look at the layer, go back to the back side here, and you again can see how having glued it down, cutting those peg holes for the registration holes at the bottom, and then carving out the design on the back side, taking it off, putting the registration pins in, flipping the board over, and then cutting the top side. So with that, then you can take the project off the material or off the table and separate the parts, and you have a two-sided ornament. Again, just a reminder that if you want to join us for any of our live webinars, you can find a registration link, the web address you see on your screen or at the link below. Feel free to join us. If you've got questions, you can bring those questions to the webinar and we could address those there. Or you could reach out to either myself at my website, CNC Learn and Build, or at nextwave.com. Thank you and see you next episode.